Hi, baby boomer fans. We are Jackie and Janine, the Pfeiffer Sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade.
We chronicled the distinct memories of our childhood in our book, While the Windmill Watched, a slice of rural America in the 1950s, which takes you on a notably historic journey through that often forgotten decade. We also want to hear about your experiences during the 1950s. We will feature guests whose special stories of that decade will bring to mind magical moments of reflection, some with tears, some with smiles, but above all, a good dose of laughter.
We would like you to chat with us as we bring to mind the sights and sounds so familiar to that time in history. Grab your favorite malt or Green River. Make sure you are wide awake and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat. Hello, and welcome back, or welcome new subscribers and watchers, viewers of the Pfeiffer Sisters, the 1950s Fun Chat. We are just so delighted to be with you again this week, featuring a new guest who lived and had a wonderful life in the 1950s, and he's all excited to tell you about it. But before we do that, would you please consider clicking on the red subscribe button in the lower right-hand corner, as well as the thumbs up symbol for this chat. We think that once you start hearing this, that you will definitely want to be a part of the thumbs up group for the 1950s Fun Chat. Jackie?
And while you're perusing your screen, please note on the bottom, the little banner going around along the bottom, www.whilethewindmillwatched.com. You can get all information about the Fun Chat and about the book, which happens to be on the upper right-hand corner, that little logo. That's a beautiful sunset up there of North Dakota's, of North Dakota. While the Windmill Watched, a slice of rural America in the 1950s. Today, though, we are going to introduce you to someone named Larry. Now, Larry was born in Green Bay, Wisconsin on February 9th, 1948. He lived there until 1959, when his family moved to a home close to Elida, Ohio. He graduated from Elida High School in 1966 and Goshen College, Goshen, Indiana, in 1970. In 1975, he married Janine Neal. Larry earned a Master's of Divinity degree from the Associated Mennonite Biblical Seminary in 1979. Now, Larry and Jean Ann are the parents of two daughters, both of whom are public school music teachers. Larry spent 35 and a half years in active pastoral ministry in the Mennonite Church before retiring in 2015. Jean Ann and Larry live in retirement close to their older daughter near Fort Wayne, Indiana. So welcome, Larry. And we have some questions we'd like to ask you about.
Hi, Larry.
About you and your life. The first one is, if you live in Indiana, how did you happen to come upon While the Windmill Watched, a slice of rural America in the 1950s?
We have a daughter. Her name is Miriam, and she's married to Matt, who lives and they live in Minneapolis. And Matt grew up in Fargo, North Dakota. And so this summer, when we visited Minneapolis, we went all the rest of the way to Fargo, and Matt showed us around his hometown, including a visit to the Zambros store in downtown Fargo. And there it lay on a table, and it spoke to me and said, buy me. And so I bought it. And I have thoroughly enjoyed reading it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to your little angel on your shoulder.
Yes.
Larry, tell us. Go ahead. Was there something more you wanted to say?
No.
Okay. Well, please then continue on and tell us about your childhood in the 50s. Did you live in a rural or an urban area? Or if you did, then when you lived in those areas, tell us about some of the favorite play activities that you were engaged in at that time.
Okay. most of the time in the 50s, I was growing up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, which of course is where I was born. And we lived in the city, although both of my parents had been very rural people. Mom had grown up on a farm, and Dad had grown up in what you would call non-farm rural poverty. And so when they met and got married shortly after the war, they settled in Green Bay, close to my mother's family. And so there we were in town, although every week we were out to the farm and got to spend a lot of time out there with the cows and I had a cousin that was about my age, and we would run and play all the time out there. And so growing up, I played all the same games as every other child does, tag, and of course the card games, Old Maid and Go Fish and those kinds of authors. I remember playing authors.
Yes,
Probably,
yes.
probably two things that I remember the most about playing when I was growing up was on the way to and from school, we would play marbles. And we played marbles differently from the drawing a ring on the ground and shooting with your thumb. We would just simply keep on rolling marbles on the direction toward school, and whoever hit the other person's marble got to keep it. And so it was a sort of a thing of just simply accumulating as many marbles as you could. The other thing I remember was badminton. My parents bought a badminton set, and we knew nothing about competitive badminton, but we just knew it was fun to hit that shuttlecock back and forth over the net. And we played it so that the thing was not to be cutthroat and kill the shuttlecock. It was to keep it up in the air as long as you could. And the person who lost the point was the person who just simply failed to finally get there. Hitting it as high in the air as we could was a part of the fun. And we just laughed and laughed and laughed and thoroughly enjoyed that. It played hours, both my sister and I together, and then Mom and Dad with us, or even guests when they came.
Yes.
So, and I remember how confused I was when we had a visitor who knew about competitive badminton. And I remember he and I were playing, and I was just confused by this thing of hitting the shuttlecock to the ground right beside me or right behind me or right in front of me. Because what I was doing was setting up lobs to him, and then he was spiking them into the ground. It was just my innocence. I did not know that you could play badminton competitively. We played it cooperatively.
Yes,
Mhm.
that reminds me, Larry, how we had a badminton set also. And it wasn't used very often because the wind in North Dakota would take that shuttlecock, and it was almost impossible to hit it and get it back and forth. Do you remember, Jackie, how we'd set up that net out by the clothesline? And there's where we'd try to play. But the interesting thing, Larry, is that Mom and Dad really didn't buy our new badminton set. We got it with S&H green stamps. Do you remember S&H green stamps from the grocery store? And then you got them and you had to lick those off of the backs of those glue of those stamps that had that ugly tasting glue on it, and then put those stamps into pages of books. And then once we got enough books, we were able to redeem those at the S&H green stamp store in Bismarck. So that's kind of our association with badminton. Even though it was fun, the wind in North Dakota really prevented us from doing much with it.
Yeah. I remember the stamps. We had S&H green stamps, but we also had, I think, something called top value stamps. They were yellow.
Yes.
And when you had a large enough amount when you're purchasing, you would receive a 50 stamp, a stamp that was worth 50, and so you only needed to put one on the page rather than having to fill the whole 50 of them.
I kind of forgot about that.
Yeah.
But we had there in Bismarck, there were the three grocery stores that I can remember. The Red Owl store, well, I gave S&H green stamps. The National Tea store gave
Mhm.
a grocery store gave another kind of green stamp. I don't remember what that one was called. And then Super Value stores had gold bond stamps, which were kind of yellow, but I think they were different than Top Value stamps. Perhaps it was just the different area of the country where they
Yeah.
were given.
Mhm.
And believe me, they weren't given with every dollar that we purchased at those stores. That was just a thank you gift, you might say. But goodness, Jackie, what all did we get with S&H green stamps? Do you remember?
I think we got a table and chair set, a card table and chairs.
Yes, we did.
And we got a croquet set. That's
Yes.
which I still have.
Did you ever play croquet, Larry?
Yes, we did. That was something that was more common for my grandparents that lived in Ohio. And so whenever we would go down to or come down to Ohio to be with my grandparents, we'd play croquet then. But we didn't have it up in Wisconsin, so we seldom played it there.
Mm-hmm. And I think another item we got with S&H green stamps was our ice chest. And that was we did not go to the lake hardly at all, but one time the Goring family and the Trauger family and us loaded up 3 cars with, of course, a picnic lunch, probably fried chicken, potato salad, and what else. And one of the families had a boat, and we went to Heart Butte Dam, west of Fargo, right, Jackie?
No, it was south of Mandan.
Yeah, Mandan area. And then we swam and fished and ate and
got sunburned.
Oh, sunburn. We were terribly sunburned. Of course, then there wasn't such a thing as sunscreen. It was, you wanted to get a tan and for both of us, we were fair enough skin that we burned pretty easily. Right. And did we ever pay for it? I don't think we wore clothes on the top from our waist up for about a week. It just hurt so badly.
I remember,
we could do that on the farm.
That too. Yes.
It's interesting how one story ties in with the next of the 50s. Yeah. Well, Larry, tell us, you had mentioned something about a chicken story. Tell us about, we can tell you about our chicken stories, but tell us about yours.
Okay. Well, this is sort of the issue of being caught between rural and it has to do with my mom's big friendship. I mean, Mom was such a relational person and had friends. And one of the friends she maintained lived on a farm out close to Appleton. And we would go and visit them from time to time, not that often. But one time we went, and the reason for going was because we were bringing back a cage of chickens. And one of the things our parents were going to do was to save money by buying the chickens live and killing them and putting them in the freezer. And so I remember having a fun time playing with the boys my age. On Sunday afternoon, we were there with the chickens. And then I was fascinated by the idea that we were going to kill these chickens and put them in the freezer. Being an urban kid, this was a whole new thing for me. And I wanted to see it. I wanted to watch it. And so the next day, we waited till I got home from school. And then Dad was killing the chickens. But I had no idea of what it meant to kill a chicken. And Dad was probably poorly prepared for dealing with things since, I mean, he wasn't on the farm. And so all he had was a stump or a piece of wood and a hatchet. And so he would get the chicken with his head on the stone and then strike it off with the hatchet. But this is where I got into trouble, because then he would just throw it on the ground. And I was just terrified by the death throes of the chicken. And some would get back on their feet and would run around headless. And I was just terrified. I had looked forward to this experience, but when it actually happened, I was just terrified. I ran inside to Mom, just weeping. And it was a while till I was ready to go back out into the backyard again, because those chickens running around without heads just
terrorized you.
Yes, it terrorized me.
Did it bother you then when your mom prepared those chickens to eat? Did it bother you to eat them?
You know, I was thinking about that, and I don't remember any sense of being turned off to eating chicken or even those particular chickens. It was just their running around and flopping around, knowing that they were dying and yet they weren't dead yet. That blew me away.
I can understand that, Larry. I can. It's still imprinted in my mind. Because we butchered chickens at home too, and not only were they for our freezer, but we sold them in Bismarck. Dad had an egg delivery route, and a lot of those customers wanted fresh chicken and raised, you might say, organic chicken. And so our family were the processors. And the only thing that I can remember specifically, well, not the only thing, the thing that I remember specifically from that incident that ties in with eating chicken afterwards was Jackie and I had the job of picking the pin feathers off the chickens after they were scalded. And I so remember having to be so thorough around the wing area. And after that, I didn't eat many chicken wings because I thought, oh, well, so what if we didn't get all the pin feathers? But that's my association with actually processing the animal to consuming it. But it does make an imprint. And I think on some people more than others, some children perhaps more than others. But it's kind of the way it was back then on the farm. We raised our own food, produced it, and then the results went into our freezer or were canned.
Yeah.
Right. Go ahead.
Oh, Larry, we're getting closer to Thanksgiving, and as we talk about food, chicken, let's meander into the area of Thanksgiving and food on your table. What was it like, and what kind of foods were served?
Okay, of course, I'm imagining we're talking about the big family gathering at Grandma's house, and so I think of it as being a traditional Thanksgiving meal. Grandma would have roasted the turkey. Of course, the thing I remember a lot as a small child was the smell of the coffee perking and coming in the kitchen, and just the permeating smell through the whole house of the coffee. I've never learned to like coffee, but it smelled good in Grandma's kitchen. And of course, Mom would do a lot of preparing for the meal, and we would be bringing stuff along. Aunt Vi lived upstairs, and so she would be bringing stuff downstairs to the gathering. And then Aunt Lil and Uncle Harry came over from where they had a hardware store in a nearby town. And so everybody would be bringing stuff. I remember one of Mom's big contributions was the cranberry salad, which I got to help prepare a lot of. That we would wash the cranberries and run them through a food grinder. And I was always so impressed with the fact that included whole oranges, even the peel. And I just ground it all up. And I have no idea, probably an unconscionable amount of sugar that I stirred in there. And that was a big thing that everybody enjoyed, except for us kids who were not yet prepared to enjoy the taste of cranberry. But then I'm sure that we had the traditional dressing and sweet or mashed potatoes, probably sweet potatoes. But the other thing I remember is the long line of the table. That Grandma was a relational person. She was very into hospitality, and so there were all these people that would show up. And I wish now that I had paid attention to who they were. They were some of the patriarchs of the family, of my heritage. But I was 5 and 7 years old. I didn't care about these old women or old men or old women there. And I wish now that I had paid attention to who they were, but that's all gone now. I can't resurrect that.
Yep.
I've often thought that I need to mention to our daughters who are in their late 30s, early 40s, that you need to ask questions now, because this isn't when I can remember. And yet Personally, I didn't have those questions back then in at that age, and
Yeah.
it really I think those questions come about, or you are more curious about your legacy, and as you get older, and I think that's so interesting that happens.
Well,
Larry,
it's a good point, good time to bring out why we even wrote that book. It was for our daughters, because they don't know the questions to ask. We have the answers there, and so when they feel they want to pick up that book, and we at least will tell them a few things about their heritage.
Do you only have
Yes.
daughters between you? Do
Excuse
you only
me?
have daughters between you?
Yes.
Yes.
We each have 2 daughters, and they are
Okay.
married,
Oh,
and we
I
have
have.
grandchildren.
Yeah.
We do have a grandson and a granddaughter, so we do have a boy in the family, and Jackie
Okay.
has grandsons also. Yes.
Right?
Larry, I have to ask, because we talk about in the book in our Monocan community, and we've interviewed guests too who lived during the 50s but didn't have electricity, or at least dependable electricity. They didn't have running water unless they ran to the well and got it and brought it back to the house. They
Yes.
had an outhouse. They didn't have an indoor septic system, and some of these folks didn't even have an indoor septic system until when they left home in their 20s. So what was it like for you in Wisconsin and then in Ohio for that? Because I often think of the United States of being developed from the eastern border, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. And that seems how technology has occurred in our country too. It moves from the east to the west.
Mm-hmm. Well, from both of my parents would have grown up in houses without electricity and bathroom services and running water, but I always had it because my father was scrabbling up from poverty, and so that meant that he built his own house. That's one of the great stories of our family heritage, how he built that first house. He tore down a derelict house that he was able to purchase for like $75 and used the wood he scavenged out of that house to build a house in Green Bay, close to where he worked. And so, of course, since he was building his old house, he built it with a bathroom, a modern kitchen, and it was a small, tiny kind of rude house, but it had the facilities. And then every step up, every couple of years, we would be moving to a new house. As Mom and Dad were extremely frugal, were able to save the money to move to a better place. And so I always had a functioning bathroom. I always had running hot and cold water. And so the idea of growing up without was not part of my life.
Okay.
That it makes, when you talk about frugality and building a house from lumber that you have used, that you recycled, that was very popular on our farm too, and in our family, when our dad built a garage, which was probably a 1950s version of a modern machine shed. Although it was built out of lumber, it was a 4-stall garage, and he ended up having his shop in there as well. He used wood from our old house, which was torn down in about 1950, 51, Jackie? Would that be correct? And that was used to build the garage. And then even I can recall later on, of course, my dad and mom had farmed at Goodrich, North Dakota for a short while after they were married. But that's where my grandpa and grandma Pfeiffer had lived and farmed. And we somehow, where in this whole mix of things, there was a loafing shed kind of attached to a lean-to that was moved in by truck, a moving truck, and installed and put on in a cattle lot. So that was another situation of frugality. It was free, you might say, although we had to also consider the cost of moving it. But once it was put on a foundation, it was there and built and ready to use, either for the cattle in the loafing part of the barn, or on the other side is where we would put baby chicks when we got them.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because you're talking about that reminds me that when we moved to Wisconsin, we built a new house there. using, of course, just regular lumberyard lumber. But to build the garage, Dad bought an old barn or old garage, tore it down, and built it with the old lumber. And then he wanted a tool shed, and so he went to his aunt and uncle's and asked to buy an old shed they had, and moved it over with the tractor onto the. And so in that house or on that lot, two of the three buildings were scavenged and just built with used lumber or recycled.
And Larry, how do you see that your life growing up in the 1950s has influenced your life as an adult?
Well, I'm thinking that probably the most important thing was being raised by parents who grew up in the Depression. I've already used the term Dad's rural poverty. He grew up extremely poor. Mom's farm was not a thriving farm. It wasn't very large. And so she grew up in quite a bit of poverty, although not as bad as Dad. And so that frugality, that sense of stretching every dollar, squeezing every dime, came through to us in our family in a major way. And so that has been the way my wife and I have lived. She grew up in much the same way, coming out of poverty with parents who grew up in the Depression. They trained her the same way. In fact, I rather proudly say this, that at one point, our daughters, when they were home for Thanksgiving, said thank you to my wife and me because we taught them how to handle their money wisely. We had learned from our parents, we passed it along to them, and they said, we see so many of our peers who don't know how to handle their money and are all the time running out. And you taught us to budget and to make sure that we had enough. And it makes a difference for us. And we really appreciate that we were so well taught by you. And that is coming entirely out of growing up in the 50s, being taught by parents who grew up in the 30s and the 40s.
I'm so often reminded when you talk about saving money and using every bit of it for needs, maybe more so than any wants. Wants might have come about once in a while. But one of Mom's favorite sayings was, money doesn't grow on trees, girls, if we saw something that we wanted. And that has stuck with me for all of my years of life since she ingrained that into me. And yes, it is, when we think about the 50s, they're really, for our family at least, there wasn't such a thing as buying on credit. There were no charge cards and certainly no debit cards. And so our parents had to work to earn the cash and then save it in order to be able to have the things that they needed for existence and for their family as well.
I remember very well saving to buy a basket for my bicycle. And I had a month or a weekly allowance of 25 cents. I don't know how much that basket cost, but I had to literally count down the weeks in which I would be able to save up to 25 cents. And I remember so proudly walking into the store with the amount I needed to buy that bicycle basket, which represented, I don't know how many weeks of 25 cents allowances. And Dad would not, that it was up to me. I had to wait until I had the money before I could go and get it.
That is correct. Yeah. Right. Larry, in summing up our chat today, if you can think of one pleasant or fun experience that right off the top of your head about living in the 1950s, what would that be?
The thing that pops in is rather unusual. Aunt Lil, my mother's sister-in-law, had a wonderful Christmas tree that she put up. Of course, she had all the decorations because she and Uncle Harry ran a hardware store. And I remember one time, it was before Christmas, we were there, And we're upstairs in her living room, tiny little apartment, tiny little living room, but this tree. And my cousin, who was about probably 5, 6 years older, introducing us to a bubble. I had never in my life seen a bubble light, and I immediately fell in love with bubble light. And I
Yes.
still to this day love bubble lights on a Christmas tree. And somehow that memory of Sue pointing out to us this bubble light on the tree, one of the happiest things I remember of being a child.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you, Larry. We are so appreciated you joining us today as a guest on the 1950s Fun Chat. It's always, everyone has a unique story, no matter where you live in the country. If you lived during the 1950s, or if you have been influenced, your life has been influenced by someone who lived during the 1950s. Jackie,
Yes.
tell us about our next week's guest.
All righty. Thank you, Larry. Next
Yes.
week's guest is a Kansas farm girl who moved to Sitka, Alaska to teach. Her name is Kathleen Brandt, and she's a third-generation teacher. She's going to talk to us about dating in the 50s, traveling with the family, and 4-H membership. So you won't want to miss Kathleen, a lovely, lovely lady.
Until then, let your mind wander to the swell time of poodle skirts, soda jerks, and cool cars.
And be sure to click on the red subscribe button and the thumbs up button and tell your friends, even your relatives, about the 1950s Fun Chat. So do join us live every week, Monday, 8 p.m. Central. But if you can't join us at that time, the program can be found on the YouTube 1950s Fun Chat.
You can learn more about the Pfeiffer Sisters, Jackie and me, at our website, whilethewindmillwatch.com. And you've seen it probably ticking across the bottom of your screen as the Fun Chat has been ongoing. These Fun Chat episodes are also recorded and archived on our website as one of the items you can find there. However, just in case you want to purchase a copy of our book, While the Windmill Watched, A Slice of Rural America in the 1950s, we do show on that website how you can click with your little finger and get to the NDSU bookstore website, which is our national distributor. You can then order our book from them, and also see the many vendors. I believe we have over 30 plus vendors throughout the United States at this point who are carrying our book, and you might want to patronize them locally as well. So it's just fun to be able to chat with you and introduce you or reintroduce you to our book, While the Windmill Watched, A Slice of Rural America in the 1950s, available at our website, whilethewindmillwatch.com. We hope that you have had fun today, because we certainly have too. So we'll see you next time on the 1950s Fun Chat. Bye-bye.
We appreciate and thank each and every one of you, our viewers. Toodaloo.